For 25 years, a family had been torn apart, but the white envelope Dr. Phil held in his hands was about to change everything. The studio lights cast long shadows across the stage as Dr. Phil stood between two leather chairs, his face unreadable. In one chair sat Margaret, 53 years old, her hands trembling in her lap. In the other, her mother Dorothy, 78, clutching a tissue so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The audience of 200 people sat frozen, collectively holding their breath. "Stop the cameras," Dr. Phil said quietly. The entire studio went silent. Camera operators looked at each other in confusion. The director's voice crackled through someone's earpiece, but Dr. Phil raised his hand. This wasn't a commercial break. This wasn't part of the plan. This was the moment when protocol would be broken and truth would finally have its day. 24 hours earlier, Margaret had walked into the green room with a story that had haunted her for a quarter of a century. She had been 19 years old when her younger sister Emily disappeared. The police had investigated, the community had searched, but Emily was never found. And for 25 years, Margaret's mother, Dorothy, had blamed her. The accusation was never spoken aloud, but it lived in every silence between them, in every avoided phone call, in every Christmas that passed without contact. "She thinks I know something," Margaret had told the producer during the pre-in, her voice breaking. "She thinks I had something to do with Emily's disappearance, and I've spent 25 years trying to prove I didn't." The producer had called Dr. Phil immediately. This wasn't just another family conflict. This was a wound that had festered for decades, a relationship destroyed by suspicion and grief. Now on stage, Dr. Phil held the envelope that contained the truth. But what he was about to reveal would shatter everything this family thought they knew about that night in 1999. The cameras were still rolling, despite Dr. Phil's instruction. The director knew better than to stop recording during a moment like this. Dr. Phil turned to face Margaret directly. "25 years ago," he began, his voice steady and measured, "your sister Emily left your house after an argument. You've told me, and you've told your mother, that you went to bed and didn't hear her leave. Is that correct?" Margaret nodded, tears already streaming down her face. "I've said it 1,000 times. I went to bed. I didn't know she left until the morning." Dr. Phil turned to Dorothy. "And you, for 25 years, have believed that Margaret knew more than she was telling, that maybe she saw Emily leave, maybe she even followed her, and that she's been hiding that information all this time." Dorothy's voice was barely a whisper. "A mother knows. I knew she was hiding something." Dr. Phil looked down at the envelope in his hands. The studio was so quiet that people could hear their own heartbeats. "3 weeks ago," he continued, "our research team did something that should have been done 25 years ago. We re-examined the police files, we contacted the original investigators, and we found something that was overlooked in the initial investigation." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle over the room. "Margaret, you told the truth. You went to bed that night. You didn't hear Emily leave." He turned to Dorothy. "But Dorothy, you were also right. Someone in that house did know more about what happened that night." The confusion on both women's faces was identical. Dr. Phil opened the envelope slowly, deliberately. Inside was a single photograph. He held it up, not to the cameras, but to Dorothy. "This is a traffic camera photograph from the intersection 3 blocks from your house. It was taken at 2:47 a.m. on the night Emily disappeared." Dorothy leaned forward, squinting at the image. Margaret stood up from her chair, moving closer. The audience craned their necks, trying to see. "That's Emily's car," Dorothy said, her voice shaking. "But that's not Emily driving." Dr. Phil paused mid-sentence. The studio went completely silent. "No," Dr. Phil said softly. "That's your husband, Dorothy. That's Margaret's father, David." The sound that came from Dorothy's throat was unhuman. It was the sound of a soul breaking open. Margaret's legs gave out and she collapsed back into her chair, staring at the photograph as if it were written in a language she couldn't understand. "David died 7 years ago," Dr. Phil continued, his voice gentle but unflinching.
He took this secret to his grave. But the evidence was there all along, buried in a police file that no one thought to review, because the case went cold. Subscribe and leave a comment because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. The next 30 minutes were a blur of revelation and devastation. Dr. Phil walked Dorothy and Margaret through the timeline that his team had reconstructed. Emily had left the house after an argument with Margaret, yes, but she hadn't gone far. She'd gone to a friend's house 2 miles away, called her father, and asked him to pick her up. David had driven there in Emily's car because his own car was blocked in the driveway. The traffic camera showed him driving Emily's car at 2:47 a.m., but Emily wasn't in the vehicle. The police report, which had been filed but never properly analyzed, showed that David had reported the car stolen the next morning. He'd claimed Emily must have taken it during the night. No one had questioned why he would report his daughter's car stolen if she was the one missing. Our team spoke with Emily's friend, Dr. Phil said, pulling out another document. She's been carrying this guilt for 25 years. She told us that Emily called her father that night and he came to pick her up. The friend watched them drive away together. She assumed Emily had gone home. She never told anyone because she thought it wasn't relevant. Emily and her father had left together. And then Emily disappeared. She thought Emily had run away after getting home. Margaret's voice was hollow. "Where's she? Where's Emily?" Dr. Phil's expression shifted. This was the moment he'd been dreading. "I don't know," he admitted. "The police have reopened the case as of this morning. They're re-interviewing everyone who knew your father. They're looking at his financial records, his phone records from that time period. But Margaret, Dorothy, I need you both to understand something." He moved closer to them, abandoning the professional distance that usually defined his role. He knelt down between their two chairs, something the audience had never seen him do before. "For 25 years, you've been destroying each other over a lie that your husband and father created. Whether it was intentional or whether something happened that night that he couldn't explain, we may never know. But what we do know is this: Margaret, you were innocent. You told the truth. And Dorothy, the person you should have been questioning, is gone." Dorothy's face crumpled. "I blamed her," she sobbed. "I blamed my baby girl for 25 years. I wouldn't talk to her. I wouldn't see her grandchildren. I missed everything because I thought Margaret was moving." She fell to her knees in front of her mother's chair and wrapped her arms around the woman who had been a stranger to her for most of her adult life. The embrace was desperate, fierce, and 25 years overdue. Off camera, Dr. Phil made a choice no producer expected. He stood up and walked toward the wings of the stage. The cameras followed him as he approached a young man standing just outside the lights. The man was in his early 20s, tall, with Margaret's eyes. "This is James," Dr. Phil said, gesturing for the young man to join them on stage. "Margaret's son, your grandson, Dorothy. He's 22 years old. You've never met him." Dorothy's hand flew to her mouth. James walked slowly onto the stage, his own eyes filled with tears. He had grown up knowing that his grandmother was alive, but wanted nothing to do with him, that some terrible secret had severed the family before he was even born. "Hi, Grandma," he said, his voice breaking on the word. Dorothy stood up, her legs shaking. Margaret moved aside, creating space for a meeting that should have happened 2 decades ago. When Dorothy wrapped her arms around her grandson for the first time, the audience erupted, not in applause, but in the kind of collective sob that happens when 200 people witness something sacred. Dr. Phil stepped back, allowing the family their moment, but his eyes were sharp, focused. He turned to the cameras, addressing not the studio audience, but the millions watching at home. "This is what lies do," he said, his voice cutting through the emotion. "They don't just hurt in the moment. They metastasize. They grow. They poison everything they touch for years, for decades. David, whether through intention or fear or guilt, created a lie that destroyed his family. And that lie lasted 25 years because nobody thought to look at the evidence again. He paused, letting that sink in. How many of you watching right now are holding on to a story about someone in your family? How many of you have written someone off because of something you think you know? I'm asking you to consider that you might be wrong, that the story you've been telling yourself might be based on incomplete information, and that the cost of being wrong isn't just your pain, it's the pain of everyone around you. But what happened next is something no one in the room or watching at home saw coming. Dr. Phil walked back to his desk at the side of the stage and picked up his phone. The camera zoomed in as he dialed the number and put it on speaker. It rang 3 times before a man's voice answered. "Detective Morrison," the voice said. "Detective, it's Dr. Phil McGraw. I have Dorothy and Margaret here with me, and I need you to tell them what you told me an hour ago." There was a pause. Then the detective's voice came through clear and steady. "We've made an arrest in connection with Emily's disappearance, a man named Robert Chin, who was a business associate of David's. We've had him under surveillance based on new evidence that emerged during our investigation. An hour ago,